This is The Rundown, your weekly news and review from Western Mass.
Run down! Run down!
Good morning, I am Carrie Saldo. Happy Friday, April 17th, 2026. Our rundowners this week, John Gerhardtson, freelance journalist with The Shoestring, former state senator Eric Lesser, Rich Parr, vice president at Mass Inc. Polling Group, and NEPM executive editor for news, Elizabeth Roman. If you have thoughts, email therundown@nepm.org, and be sure to check out our YouTube live stream. Coming up later in the show, a month-long investigation by The Shoestring into the state's use of AI and what that might mean for your private information. Plus, whether it's schools or funding for cities and towns, Western Mass leaders say it is high time for this region to see more state funding from Boston in our rural areas. But first, the big news for the region this week, the closure of Hampshire College. Hampshire fought for years to survive. Now the college reckons with its end. That was a headline on a Mass Live story and The Republican. Juliet Schulman Hall and Greta Yoakum reporting there. Quoting, "A bell rang through Hampshire College. A student walked through campus wearing a sign that read, 'The end is nigh.' On a warm Tuesday morning, students recounted the college community flocking outside, crying and shrieking in dazed confusion. Just that morning, they heard the news that their college in Amherst would be closing due to enrollment and financial challenges. Hampshire has been struggling for years after nearly closing in 2019. For me, this one was a bit of news whiplash. I was really scratching my head because I was thinking, wasn't it just 6 months ago that we're reading headlines that the school had brought itself back from the brink, and then it was this sort of parental brain check where I went back and realized that was 2024 that news broke. So we've had two.
I like that parental brain check.
Yeah, exactly. Eric, you were state senator then. This wasn't in your district, abutting your district. But what's your reaction to this news that Hampshire will close in the fall of 2026?
Well, first, it is sad news, and we should remember that there are a lot of people impacted by this, especially the staff, the maintenance teams, the professors, the administrators. There's a lot of jobs there, and it's going to hurt a lot of people. So it's an unfortunate situation. This has been a slow-moving and now not slow-moving trend across Western Massachusetts, and I think we need to prepare for more school closures. This really exploded into the public consciousness, I think, when people remember the Mount Ida closure. That was a campus just outside Boston. In that case, the students were left high and dry. They had deposits that they couldn't get access to. They didn't know how they were going to finish their semesters, and UMass kind of swooped in to absorb a lot of those students. In the wake of that closure in 2018, the legislature passed a pretty aggressive new law that requires a lot more data sharing and oversight of schools. And part of the reason we knew Hampshire College, was in trouble was because of the requirements of the reporting that was part of that law. So, this has been a kind of bigger trend, right? We've got an aging population. Our economy is not growing the way it used to. And meanwhile, the schools need to do a better job explaining the value proposition to young people. I mean, having six-figure debt, graduating into a job market where you're not making incomes anywhere close to the ability to pay back those loans is not sustainable.
Interestingly, that was one of the things, the value proposition, that when education experts looked in 2024 at Hampshire in 2019 being on the brink of closing, it was this huge announcement here, and then coming back, raising a ton of money, and education experts at the time said, yes, that's it. Lean into what makes you different. Lean into these niche markets. But here, Rich, we saw that wasn't enough for Hampshire College.
And I think that, Hampshire is very unique in the sense that it's this sort of choose your own adventure sort of format. And definitely if you're picking a college and you're thinking about paying that tuition bill, paying those student loans, that might not be working so well for you. But I really think this is a national thing. It's not just regional. It's not just Massachusetts. It's not just Western Mass. But nationally, there's polling that shows, the Pew Research Center did a poll last fall asking about opinions of higher ed, and they've soured. They've soured among Republicans, which is pretty typical. Actually, they tend to be a little bit more sour on higher ed, but they've soured among Democrats as well. So everyone's feeling like higher ed is not moving in the right direction. It's not addressing the needs of the students. It's not addressing the needs of the economy, that there needs to be something to kind of bring that back into alignment. And I think we're going to see, as Eric said, a lot more schools kind of unfortunately fall by the wayside as this kind of shakes out.
Or people are switching to community colleges because right now in Massachusetts you have the ability to go for free. So I've seen them sort of thriving and looking for, new faculty members or trying to control the influx of students that are coming in because they're looking for affordable or free education.
Yeah. Some select comments and reactions that I read. There was the letter from college leaders that went out to the campus community and then has been published more widely. It said, quote, "We left no stone unturned, no solution unexplored, and made many sacrifices along the way." So speaking to the idea of the way in which, for folks who might be out there thinking, well, they pulled it back from the brink once, could they do it again? I think you're hearing college leaders at this point saying, no, it's really probably quite unlikely. And then President Jennifer Kreisler told the Daily Hampshire Gazette, Scott Merzbach, "This is an incredibly painful moment for the Hampshire community, and we're doing everything to support our students in completing their studies and assist our faculty and staff in navigating what comes next." John Gerhertzen, to that what comes next piece, Hampshire has said, the other 4 members of the 5-college consortium of which Hampshire is a part. I should also note that the radio license for this radio station is held by UMass Amherst, one of those colleges in that 5-college consortium. But the other 4 have stepped up and said, we're going to help students transfer. We're going to help them smooth that transition. For you as a journalist, is that one of the things you might be keeping an eye on in the weeks and months as this unfolds, or what do you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it kind of came as a shock to me when I heard the news on Tuesday. And I think it's definitely the other 4 colleges benefit from or have benefited from Hampshire's existence, be that by reputation or sort of the kind of cultural milieu around the 5 colleges.
It was interesting for me. I did not realize that the other 4 in the 5-college consortium helped to will Hampshire into existence back in the late 60s, early 70s. So we also heard this morning, the Berkshire Eagle reported that Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts will also help students transfer. They're waiving some fees. They're expediting the process. Eric Lesser, did you have something you want to add?
Yeah, so a lot of this is a result of the lessons learned from that 2018 Mount Ida closure. So they're now required by law, the closing schools, to set up these transfer agreements so that students aren't left high and dry. I mean, imagine being a 2nd or 3rd year student. All of a sudden your school is closing. How are you supposed to finish your degree? How are you supposed to earn your credits? So my sense is that will work itself out. There seems to be a lot of intentionality around making sure that those students get taken care of and are able to transfer to other schools. I think the long-running challenge we're going to have into the future is what happens to that real estate? What happens to all that land?
You have about
all those
600
buildings.
acres there in Amherst.
This is a huge parcel of land and there's a lot of infrastructure there.
Yeah.
It costs money to maintain. I mean, we all drive around abandoned buildings, abandoned warehouses, in neighborhoods when the organizations close or the businesses close, sometimes decades in the past. So, I think the town really needs to be very proactive here about making sure that there's a plan for what happens with those parcels.
And that's one of the things that Adam Frenier talked with Paul Bachman, the town manager in Amherst, about, who also happens to be a Hampshire College alum.
Yeah.
What did Adam hear?
He basically said he talked to him for a while because he is a Hampshire grad, so he was very saddened by the news. But essentially, it's beyond the real estate, right? So you have the real estate issue, and I wonder if you could look at that from the angle of housing for UMass. They've been struggling with it for so long. Amherst College,
or
they
the
can take
wider
over,
community.
right? But he was talking about what's going to happen to the infrastructure of downtown Amherst. You're talking about people that would buy their groceries at Atkins, who would go downtown and frequent the restaurants, who are living there and might be moving now. So it's a much larger effect than just the college campus. On top of that, while Eric Carle Museum will be fine, Yiddish Book Center is going to be fine. Nirvani Williams on our team did a story on that yesterday. But the Early Learning Center that houses all of these children, this daycare center, it's going to close. So you're looking at 40 families or so that are going to have to find a new place to have their children, be taken care of. And childcare is incredibly expensive.
Yeah, the Eric Carle and the Yiddish Book Center are both
Yes,
technically
they're on
the
the
campus
property
of Hampshire College, but separate entities.
Yes.
Well, tons to watch here. Plenty of things that I know journalists in this region will be keeping an eye on as we move forward. John K. Hurston, I want to move to a piece that you reported recently for the Shoestring. The headline, Massachusetts AI program is more than meets the eye. This was a months-long investigation into AI use at the state level that you dug into, and really this negotiation with the state over what information they would allow access to. Summarize what you reported here. In March, there was a press event that marked the state signing a contract to bring ChatGPT to employees of the executive branch. It got a lot of headlines. But you really dug into at least beyond that, and you found that at least 40 state agency functions, many of which touch sensitive resident data, are now or maybe imminently powered by AI. Now, presumably, you began digging into this before that March announcement. What ignited your idea to take a look at this? Because it's a very complex issue. I encourage people to go on the Shoestring website and dig into the full piece, but let's keep talking.
Yeah. So there was a task force that the governor formed in, I want to say it's 2024-ish, to sort of look at the ways that generative artificial intelligence technology could be incorporated into how the state provides services, does business, things like that. And so part of that was like there's these partnerships that they formed with a few colleges. I think it was Northeastern, UMass, and Harvard, I believe. Different separate years, maybe.
So these smaller threads, and you were thinking, wait a minute, there's a bigger story here, and you reported that as many as 40 different state agency functions could be or are being powered by AI, and ultimately the state agreed to give you information about 9 of those.
Yeah, so those 40 were either proposed or it's unclear if some of them might be beta testing or like they were declined to be adopted. I couldn't find that out, but they withheld them under the deliberative exemption to the public records law.
So some use of the public records law. Quickly mention a couple of the specific uses you find out about. There's a pilot program being used by the Department of Transitional Assistance, which transcribes and summarizes SNAP eligibility calls in real time, and then that transcript gets saved to the individual person's benefits record. There's also a mass
it's
health.
actually not. It's not the transcript itself. It's a summary of the transcript.
Right. Thank you.
AI summary.
And the transcript
Mass
is
health.
yeah.
So
The
even
transcript's
more
not
watered down.
saved.
Yeah, but they can edit it too, as you're reporting. Said.
Correct. That's my
Against the
understanding.
real time. And Mass Health is also piloting a similar system to that one that is being used by the DTA. And then there's an RMV virtual assistant that answers licensing questions on mass.gov using publicly available content. So any help for folks dealing with the RMV, I feel like is welcome help.
Fair.
But, what's the most concerning thing for you as you looked at these various uses?
So I think, and I just want to say, first off, I'm all for anything that makes the employees of executive agencies easier because I annoy them enough myself.
We all do.
But it's, whether or not using AI is a good thing for what they're doing, some of what they're doing seems to be contrary to, the governor's official policy positions, such as not training models on the state's data. For example, that the Mass Health, there's a request for information out that would potentially allow vendors to use the data that they're processing to fine-tune AI models to make them work better for that specific data set. And part of that is the state would then own that intellectual property so that it couldn't be disseminated more widely. But
And so there are questions about, once this information is gathered, where is it being held in the cloud? Whether that is the safest place and most effective place to be holding what could be sensitive data. If you're calling and talking about SNAP benefits or Mass Health benefits, Social Security numbers could come up, other sensitive,
Thinking HIPAA violations. All over the
exactly,
place,
other private information. But Rich Parr, you looked at some AI-related polling. What did you find?
Well, so nationally, I think the polling's pretty mixed on AI. The NBC News put out a poll a couple of months ago showing that more Americans think that the risks of AI outweigh the benefits. And more locally, we just did a poll and released it a couple of months ago of parents about AI in the public schools and education. And I think one of the really striking findings there was not so much that parents are opposed to it. I think a lot of parents are kind of up in the air about what's going to happen, but they're in the dark about what's going on in their own schools. So 50% of parents couldn't really answer the question of whether they knew if their own kids' classrooms were using AI in some way at this point.
I probably fall into that camp
yeah,
at this point,
right? So there's a bit of a lack of information about this, and this is at a time I think where there's a lot of challenges to AI. The Maine, I think, has just passed a lot of banned data centers up in AI, and the energy costs that are spiking now around the world are going to affect some of these data centers. So there's a lot of challenges around AI right now, and I think people are looking for information about how it's being used and aren't getting it right now.
I think I just want to say quickly on balance before we head to the break here, John, what did you hear from the state on their take and how they're protecting data and use of AI?
So I think, it's not something that they're not thinking about at all, for sure. The Mass Health one, I know they have specific safeguards in place to basically strip any identifying data from the inputs before they're sent using the separate, it's not quite AI, but it's similar tool. And but yeah, I mean, generally they've just been sort of tight-lipped about many of the specifics.
Well, you can read the full details on the reporting in this shoestring. We're going to head to a break, but still ahead, making noise about the need for more state funds for rural parts of the region. Meanwhile, some towns are trying to raise more money through taxes, but a look at why 2 towns in the 413 rejected that move this week. If you have thoughts, email the rundown at nepm.org. Be sure to watch us on YouTube. I'm Carrie Saldo. We'll be right back here on The Rundown. Welcome back to The Rundown here on 88.5 NEPM. I am Carrie Saldo, joined by journalist John Gerhardsen and Elizabeth Roman, as well as former State Senator Eric Lesser and pollster Rich Parr. Let's get back into it. The appeals for more state funding for rural areas and schools. Let's start with the latter. The Springfield Republican newspaper, there was a story earlier this month by Namu Sunpath, quoting, "For decades, school leaders in Western Massachusetts have been fighting to get the state's attention, arguing that an unfair funding formula leaves them at a disadvantage. Costs are soaring, they say. With student enrollment down, undermining state aid, districts are gutting staff." The piece goes on to say that legislators say state funding formulas need to be revamped. We've talked about that before on the show. School committee members say the governor needs to do more for rural districts. Students say they want the same opportunities taken for granted in more wealthy districts. But there is, spoiler alert, no clear path to a solution. Here, I have convened us all. Let's solve this problem in 6 minutes. Ready, set, go. One place that maybe we could start here, Eric Lester.
Yeah. So the crux of the issue is that the formula for reimbursement is a complicated formula, but at the end of the day, it's a function of per pupil reimbursement. There are some add-ons for lower income districts, for English language learners. There's some other variables, but at its base, it's a per pupil reimbursement. So it's logical and it's correct that the school committees are saying that if their student populations are going down, their reimbursement rates from the state are going down. But the problem with that is your costs are going up. Even if your student population is reducing, the costs are still going up. Why? Health insurance is a big one. There's a lot
Huge,
of
and we're seeing that with Prop 2.5 overrides.
Exactly, and there's a lot of very significant costs for special education. There's a lot of new costs around technology in the classroom and other things. So it's correct. It's a structural issue, and especially in Western Mass, where we have an older population, a median age that's going up, student populations that are declining, we're going to see this get worse and worse. And there had been an effort over the years to try to consolidate or regionalize the towns in order to get that scale. but you lose a lot in that regionalization. Towns lose their identity, they lose local control over the schools. A lot of the geographies are very spread out, so you'll have kids on a bus for an hour and a half, to get to school. So
Even just one micro example of that happening in Pittsfield right now, Morningside Elementary School, which is one of the locally based elementary schools, the city's grappling whether or not to close it. And the community is really pushing back, saying, don't do this. But the city's looking at it from a dollars and cents perspective. So you've got those two things at odds. You saw Lieutenant Governor Driscoll in the 413 this week. Karen Brown covered that for NEPM. People were urging state leaders for more state funding. And one way that might be coming to a reality is they were newly sworn in this week. It was a state commission that was announced last August. And the commission is designed to reimagine this very sexy word, payment in lieu of taxes, pilot, which is specifically we're looking here specifically at the commission at state-owned land. We're not talking about all nonprofits. So parks, forests, wildlife sanctuaries, a ton of the things that we all know that we have here in the 413, where is the bulk of this state-owned land in Western Massachusetts. Liz, what did Karen Brown hear people telling the lieutenant governor?
Yeah, I mean, I think the sentiment is that we pay into a lot of systems that are not serving us. The big one was that they were talking about was the Quabbin, right? So there's all of these Eastern Mass communities that are benefiting from that system, and Western Mass towns are receiving nothing from outside of the beauty of being able to go on the land and enjoy it in that way. But there's no financial benefit for them there. So I think it's always that feeling of like, we offer a lot and we pay into a lot. We pay into the MBTA, we pay into all these systems, and we're not getting anything in return.
State Senator Joe Comerford said that Western Mass stewards the land by keeping developers away. And so we, quote, hold it back from the tax rolls in our communities and pay the price with very high property taxes and budgets that are too tight. Not only are we breathing for the whole Commonwealth, we're growing food for the whole Commonwealth. And to Liz's point, we're stewarding the water for much of Eastern Massachusetts. Rich Parr, what's on your mind here?
Yeah, I think I'm very interested to see how this is going to, this pilot issue, in the other sense of pilot, is going to affect this tax issue and the issue we just talked about, which is higher ed. So I've already heard, grumblings and whisperings in Northampton where we're probably going to be facing an override to fund our schools at some point. Well, what could Smith be doing more for us? Or in South Hadley, what could Mount Holyoke be doing more for this? So are we going to be in a situation where these higher ed institutions, which are struggling on their own, are going to be asked to be doing more to kind of fill some of these gaps that we're seeing?
The classic
because
town
the state
gown.
Yeah,
the
that's
town
always
and
been a
gown,
thing in
yeah.
Long Meadow too, with Bay Path University being
Yeah.
there, and they offer a lot to the community, but also it's like, where's that financial contribution?
No matter what's decided, Lieutenant Governor Driscoll pointed out that the legislature will also have to approve more money. Aaron Lesser.
Well, and this brings us back to the structural challenge, right? Which is, and I applaud Senator Comerford, for bringing this on. There are 5 state senators representing the entire, 413 region. There are more than 5 state senators representing single neighborhoods in Boston. So we have a structural issue here, which is that it's very, very hard to get the resources to our rural communities for the simple reason of arithmetic in the legislature. But I think one hope that there was that maybe remote work would help turn the tide on the demographic challenges in some of these communities, meaning that if you could connect people better to jobs elsewhere, they could potentially stay in their local communities, make those incomes, and invest and pay taxes and buy homes in these communities. There are some examples of that working out, but not at the scale that we would need. So I think ultimately the policy solution here is adding in a rural factor to the way the school reimbursements work. The same way you have a factor for English language learners, for free and reduced school lunch, things like that.
John, I know you took a look at a pilot issue in Westfield. It's somewhat unrelated, but for you, what did you take away from that reporting that you did?
So I looked at, there was a planned data center in Westfield for a few years that was going on. And it's a little different because this would be a pilot program between like a private entity, not state-owned land.
Right.
But it was like, it wasn't nothing. I think it was like 200 million-ish that over 20 years or so.
So an agreement that would be spread out, which is common for pilot.
The company had agreed to pay.
Yeah.
But it was, when you look at like what the actual value of like the facilities that they would be putting in, and then like the computers and stuff that they would be putting in there, is billions of dollars.
Yeah.
So they leaving a lot of money on the table.
And at this point, that data center is, we're not sure. Yeah. But it's one of those things that who never know, right? Well, the spring, it seems like it's turning into the season of Proposition 2.5 overrides, right? Communities also appealed, as they're appealing to the lieutenant governor this week, while these Prop 2.5 overrides are popping up. The Marblehead Current had something that I wanted to share. Quote, data from the Massachusetts Department of Revenue shows a sharp increase in both the number of communities placing override questions on ballots and the total dollar amounts requested. In fiscal year 2026 alone, 54 municipalities placed 74 override questions on local ballots, seeking more than $158 million in additional tax revenue. I know that's a lot of numbers, right? But the second largest total since the early 90s. Massachusetts has had this mechanism in place since 1980, so it feels very familiar to all of us sitting around the table. But this week we learned both West Hampton and South Hadley said, nope, not happening. Rich Parr, what's your reaction?
It's inflation. I mean, inflation is pushing beyond that 2.5% cap number, and it's making it harder to make these budgets. At the same time, our polling consistently showing that cost of living is the number one thing that people are telling us they're concerned about. And it's really hard to ask people to raise their taxes, particularly older residents who are maybe on fixed incomes. And, that property tax bill is a really big deal for them. So cost of living is both edges of that sword are hurting these municipalities and making it harder for them to raise money. And it's just a challenge, I think, to figure out like how are we gonna square this circle with some of these things upcoming.
Yeah. A little bit of tech coming into the studio, no
Always,
problem.
always.
It's real life, not a problem. There's a headline in the Wall Street Journal this week. A 50% property tax hike proposal is tearing this Massachusetts town apart. South Hadley is a canary in a canary in the coal mine as local governments nationwide face the end of pandemic aid and rising costs. A little dramatic for sure, but also quite a bit of truth there.
Yeah, the canary in the coal mine is correct. I mean, Carrie, you mentioned the 1990s. People remember or might remember the Barbara Anderson sort of anti-tax movement. This feels a lot like that. There's also going to be a very significant ballot question pending in November, which would ask voters to lower the Massachusetts income tax from 5% to 4%. This comes on the heel of the commentary about, Texas and Florida being so much more competitive and attracting all these jobs. And so it does feel like the zeitgeist now is fatigue with taxes. And I think it's going to be really incumbent on policy leaders in this moment to make the case for efficient and effective use of government services, especially when gas prices are going up, grocery prices are going up, the economy feels very uncertain, there's anxiety about AI. All of these things, I think, are looped together. And, South Hadley is not a community with a reputation for not funding its schools.
Right.
So this is, I think, a big moment for the state, which is if a community like South Hadley is rejecting an override vote like this, that means every community in the state
And they took
potentially
two
could.
different cracks at the bat. There was a
Right.
9 million
And
or
an
so
11
and an
million,
11
yeah.
million. But South Hadley reported to Mass Live that the schools will likely cut administrative positions, multiple teachers, sports teams, mental health employees. Also, positions within the town's police, public works, human services, and more will likely be eliminated or reduced. So there's, it's really difficult to ask people to spend more amidst rising prices, but there's also going to be some real world consequences here.
Absolutely.
Liz, I don't know about you, but I remember sitting in Proposition 2.5 override votes as a reporter, and you
Absolutely.
could cut the tension in those rooms with a
Always.
knife, but it was also tied to something typically very specific. They're building a new school.
Right,
They're
yeah,
doing,
exactly,
The Long Meadow School project was one of my first big
Right.
stories that I covered when they were trying to build a new high school. And
Right.
people, they, like you said, South Hadley, Long Meadow, Northampton, they care about education. They want to support. And Massachusetts as a whole, we're known as a community that is okay with taxes because we know that it's going to the benefit of our educational system and to public government services that help people. But I mean, you can only ask so much,
Yeah. Well, we have come to the end of our time here today on the Rundown. So much more that we could discuss. I want to thank this morning's panel, John Gerhardtson, Eric Lesser, Rich Parr, and Elizabeth Roman. My thanks for our tech support this morning from Bart Rinkin and Ayu Suryawan. Get out there and have a great day, everybody.